I'd like to call this a regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. Today is Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. So we have a number of things on our agenda today. The first is an update on affordable housing for the town of Darien, and we're joined by Jeremy Ginsberg from Planning and Zoning, who will give us that update. Jeremy, thanks for coming.
Thank you all. I'll try to stay away from you so it's easier to hear me without a mask on, so I'll try it that way for a little while.
We try to do that in normal times.
So I'm here a little bit today to tell you a little bit about State Statute 8-30G, which has been on the books for quite a while, but certainly has ramifications for Darien and many communities throughout the state. So I'll give you a little background on that, how it's affected Darien through the years, and what we expect to see going forward. So what we'll do is start with the state statute, which was passed, more than 20 years ago, 30, maybe 40 years ago, but it really took shape, took ground. Developers found it back in the late 1990s. It's really a provision of the state statutes which was specifically designed to encourage the development of affordable housing. And the way it does that is it really puts the burden on planning and zoning commissions. And let me explain what that means. In normal circumstances, when someone has a project, commercial or residential, what they just have to do to the Planning and Zoning Commission is prove it meets the zoning regulations. Zoning regulations are a book that's published. You just find the regulations that apply. You come to a hearing, prove to the commission you meet that, and pretty much the commission has to approve your project. Pretty general, pretty broad, but that's generally the way it works. Normal circumstances. The way 8-30G works is it kind of flips it on its head. The burden then becomes on the Planning and Zoning Commission to prove why the application doesn't meet public health and safety. And there's been a lot of case law through the years, and the courts have said, that's a reason, nope, this is not a reason, and the courts have kind of fine-tuned what could be legitimate reasons related to public health and safety. So, for example, the fact that it's too big, that's not a reason you can deny an affordable housing application. The fact that it doesn't meet our regulations, nope, that's not a safety reason, that's not a health reason. So commissions throughout the state, keep in mind it applies to many communities, have struggled with this. What is a legitimate reason? What's not a legitimate reason? And of course, with the court's guidance, that helps both applicants understand what's a so-called winning argument, and it helps communities understand. What's interesting about 830G, the statute, is it does not apply to every community in the state. It doesn't apply to 169 communities. It only applies to those that have less than 10% of their housing stock as affordable. So, for example, Stamford's exempt, Norwalk, Waterbury, Bridgeport, Hartford, mostly bigger cities, etc. Basically, it's designed to affect smaller communities, suburban communities, all been working with this statute for many years. So you can imagine planning and zoning commissions like yourself are volunteers. In their case, they're elected, but they're still volunteers. And they have to get up to speed on how to process normal applications, commercial, residential, mixed use, all the various state statutes that affect development. But then this statute is so different, it's very much a new way of thinking, a new way of processing applications. So I think in some of the handouts I gave you a kind of a flavor for how many applications we've seen through the years in Darien. And I think there's been 9 applications that have invoked this section of the statute. The first one was in 1998. And believe it or not, I was here for that. And the most recent one was 2016. I was here for that one as well. And the applicants have gotten more sophisticated through the years. I'd like to think some communities have as well in understanding what they can and can't do. Almost in every case, you can imagine, and if you've seen the public hearings, they're usually controversial because someone is trying to put something different, and it's usually almost always, in fact, it's always bigger than what's allowed by the regulations. So the expectation when people move to a certain area or zone is many people, when they buy houses, they look at, hey, what can be done around me? I don't want to live next to a slaughterhouse. I would prefer not to live next to a telecommunications tower. So people oftentimes do their research and say, I want to live in whatever. I want to live above Chipotle. Yeah, great. Okay. I want to live in Avalon. I want to live wherever it is. Kensett. I want to buy a condo in Kensett. So people do research based on expectation. 830G, in essence, overrules the expectation in communities that don't meet 830G by having a sufficient amount of affordable housing, which the state has deemed to be 10% of your housing supply. So,
what's the definition of affordable?
well, Paul, that's a good question because they've changed the definitions through the years. What they focus on is deed restricted affordable. Deed restricted affordable is a new thing. So communities it's a term of art that didn't exist 50 years ago. So for example, there's a new phrase for naturally occurring affordable housing, which doesn't count. So for example, if a lot of towns in Trumbull and Milford, where it's cheaper to live than Manhattan or Darien or many places, but it's still not enough in the state's eyes. So in fact, there's been a number, without digressing too far, there was a whole issue about mobile homes in Milford. There was a mobile home park. People said, that's not affordable housing. I don't know what is. It's not very expensive. And the state said, but it doesn't count. So Milford had to fight with the state for a while, and they got some legislation passed. But basically, it's the state, for purposes of 830G, is looking at deed-restricted affordable housing. And deed-restricted affordable housing didn't exist 50 years ago.
Well, let's say the normal rent is $2,000 a month.
Right.
Does that mean affordable means $1,200 a month?
Right.
Can we put some numbers around it?
Right. There are certain numbers. What they look at is everything's relative to the income of the person that lives there. When you talk about deed-restricted housing, because what they want to do is relate it to the state median income and area median income. So it gets very complex because if you think of, say, what used to be Allen O'Neill, which is now the Heights of Darien, when the Housing Authority built that, they had specific provisions placed in the Darien land records, which each unit is restricted as to the income levels and the rents people who live there can pay. Because the theory is you shouldn't pay more than 30% of your income for housing.
So can you earn out of it? Are those leased or owned properties?
Those are rented.
Those are rented.
So there is an argument that all of a sudden you get a much better job.
Right.
You're working at Stop and Shop, and all of a sudden you're promoted to regional manager of Stop and Shop. Yeah, you would arguably say, sorry, because they income verify, I think it's annually, and they'd say, sorry, instead of making $30,000, you now make $130,000. You've incomed out. It doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
But most people don't take that big jump. They go up in small steps in life, I guess. But there are those provisions where the Housing Authority and others have to income verify the deed-restricted units. Avalon does it, Garden Homes does it every year, and they provide a list to the town of Darien saying, here's the list of the people, I don't ask for the names, the income of the person that lives in unit A12, which is a deed-restricted unit, the income level of the person that lives in B17, which is a deed-restricted unit, to prove that they are properly administering this such that, I'll call it, the housing is affordable and they're renting it to people who income qualify. So there's that aspect. They can only rent it for so much to people that only make so much, so they're not overpaying for housing. And that is what the state envisioned for 8-30G. That's what the state wants.
Most of these are apartments. All the apartments are homogeneous, so I couldn't say, Jeremy, you live in an affordable unit and...
That's an excellent point. The state has made it very clear to communities that they want If you look at Avalon, for example, from the outside, none of us can figure, I don't even know which ones are the affordable units. They're designed to look the same. Garden Homes, which is there's a brown office build, what looks like an office building, across the street from Rory's. Used to be a small Class B office space that they gutted the interior and made 35 apartments. You can't tell which ones are the affordables. You can't, naked eye, you can't tell. So that's what they want, is affordable housing. That's the current thinking. They want affordable housing to blend in with market rate housing. So people don't know, and
So what's the incentive for the developer?
the 830G, the main incentive for the developer is they, in essence, I'll simplify it, get to override local zoning. So, say Garden Homes.
So instead of 30 units, they can put in 40 units and they make up for the lower rents with more volume.
Bingo. And that's what they get, is you're getting more apartments, condos, whatever, because some of those, a certain percentage designated by the statute, have to be lower rents. So instead of, in Darien, a good example, you could rent a market rate 2-bedroom for $3,000 a month, maybe you could get about half that. So the state is requiring that a percentage of the units that you build have to be deed restricted, affordable. The other bonus you get is the deed restriction doesn't last forever under 830G. It lasts for 40 years. After 40 years, it goes up to full market rate. So if you think of Avalon, which was built in, let's call it 2000, their deed restriction on the affordable units was, I think it was 30 or 40 years, doesn't matter. When that time is up, when those apartments clear out, they will take the rents from what will likely be $2,000 up to $4,000, or whatever the numbers are.
But the town has to then replace the stock of affordable housing they lose to make the percentage.
Exactly, and then the state's gonna say, huh, Darien, you're losing affordable housing. So it's,
By their own laws, not
well,
by our.
it's a good question. Can we tell Avalon to, hey, why don't you just keep them affordable? Avalon, publicly traded company,
Oh, yeah, they're not gonna do that.
is gonna say, wait, $2,000 a month, and there's 47 affordable units, that's $94,000 a month. The math adds up very quickly, so that,
Yeah.
so that's a different problem for another time. That's a problem that my successor will have to deal with. For now, the question is, the town's never gonna get to 10% affordable. Right now, we're at about 3.5. And we've made great strides in the past 20 years to get from 2 to 3.5. Think about the Heights of Darien, the Royal of Darien, Avalon, Garden Home, hundreds of units we've had built just to get us up 1%. So to get to 10%, you can imagine we would need 8 to 10 more Avalons. Avalon is 189 units.
Sorry, my questions are piling up. I guess I have two. One is, if there's a ban, let's say that there's a threshold of $50,000 in income, and someone comes in at making 30 and they do get a promotion, but it's only to 40, is there rent increase, or are they?
There is a little rent increases are built in, because again, it's based on state median income and some other parameters, so there's a little formula. So yes, rents can go up a little bit, a lot, but they can't
Only up to a certain point.
They can't do this, which is arguably what some landlords do, is keep raising it till people, so you can't do that, but you are allowed to get some rent increases.
But at 30%, I mean, if it was 30%, it was climbing, like, that can happen, but it can't
Yes.
go above a certain ceiling.
Correct.
And then, how is the 10% calculated? Is it on the market value, like the grand list, or is it on the units, number of
Units. So for example, Darien has about 7,000, we're a population of about 21,000. We have about, it's called 7,000 units, use that number. We would need 700 affordable housing units.
And we've added 270 since 2000, so I guess we didn't have a lot before then. So if we have 7,000, you said we're at 3%, so we're.
Not even close.
Yeah.
So the 10%, but what the state did, communities said, like Darien and Westport, Ridgefield, said, wait a minute, we're never gonna get to 10%. You know what, state? Forget it. The state built in this provision called a moratorium. You can get a 4-year moratorium where you don't have to deal with 8-30G applications if you're building enough in the interim. And they gave a nice complex formula that said, based upon the previous census, you need a certain amount of what they call housing unit equivalent points. So Darien needed 141 points to get a moratorium. It's back in 2010. And I think I gave you the numbers, and in 2010, we said, oh, we have 2 projects that qualify, and basically what you have to do to prove to the state you qualify is you have to put together a book like this, which documents every project, every deed restricted, every unit, when it was approved, the certificate of occupancy. It takes a long time to get this book put together, shipped up to the state, give the state time to review it, etc. And that happened in 2010. We submitted it, we got the moratorium approved, and that moratorium was 4 years, 2010 to 2014. And Darien, I'm proud to say, did exactly what the state wanted us to do, which is starting, even continuing past 2014, we continued to build affordable housing, approve affordable housing, get it built, document it, and we are one of, I'm proud to say, I think it's only 3 or 4 communities in the state of Connecticut that got a second moratorium. The first one's very hard to get. The second one's, they make it harder, each one. And so the second one we got in 2016. And you can see that took us 4 projects to get that second moratorium. Not only the Heights of Darien, Garden Homes, a couple units on Tokenique Road on an upper floor, and then 3 units on Hoyt Street.
So what was the impetus behind the legislation that created all this?
There was a Blue Ribbon Commission established, I think it was late 1980s, early 1990s, that those were boom years around here, and looked at the issue of affordable housing and said, something needs to be done. They, in essence, copied a statute from Massachusetts, which basically does the same thing. It's almost the identical statute. It said, we need this in Connecticut, and that law was passed late 80s, early 90s. Since that time, there's been a number of proposals to tighten it up, both on developer sides and community sides. Almost every legislative session, there's a ton of legislation proposed. At this point, legislators are loath to deal with it because you're never going to make anyone happy. There's too many interest groups on every side of this that basically we've talked about it for years. It's going to be on the books for many years to come. It's just the way it is. The legislature has basically told communities, figure out how to deal with it because it's going to stay.
So we're now at the end of the second moratorium.
That's correct.
So what's the update on that in terms of the strategy that you're recommending that we pursue?
Well, certainly I know the Planning and Zoning Commission since 2016 has approved a number of projects. One of the things that's really out of their control is you can approve all the projects you want, but there's no guarantee people will build them. So you can approve them, but there's no guarantee that they will approve them. There's no guarantee that a neighbor might appeal and win in court. And there's no guarantee that a global pandemic might come along and affect construction and what people want to do, and et cetera, et cetera. So the commission has approved a number of projects. The one that you're going to see certificates of occupancy issued on next month will be the Royal at Darien, which is the former Old Town Hall Homes, corner of Academy Street and Post Road. That was a project put forth by the Darien Housing Authority. Used to be 30 units there. The commission approved 55 units of varying income levels, and that's coming online next month. Certainly the project at the corner of Leroy and West, that was actually denied by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The court overturned the commission's denial, and that project is now built, and that's going to get us some moratorium points. One interesting note there is the point system, the number of points you get per unit, varies on whether it's a rental unit or an owner-occupied unit. It also, the lower you deed restricted for, the more points you get. Although if it's limited to elderly only, you don't get as many points. So Leroy West, at this point, as I sit here today, is restricted for elderly only, so we're not gonna get a lot of points for that.
Jeremy, which, on your spreadsheet, which one is that? The last one, the Leroy and West one, is that the 168 West?
Pemberton.
Or
Pemberton.
Pemberton,
Yep.
okay. And one other question, you had said the second moratorium is harder to get than the first. What made it harder?
What makes it harder is you need a certain number of moratorium points, and that's based on how many units you had as of the last census. But if you know, a census comes out every 10 years. So right now, for the next couple months, we're working off the 2010 census. Well, the 2020 census will be coming out next year. We all in this room believe that Darien has more housing units in 2020 than we did in 2010. And you can tell that because I gave you a list with all these things that have been. So we know that the next moratorium, we're gonna have to get more points unless we can get a moratorium within the next 8 months.
What's the penalty?
Yeah, what's the penalty if we don't?
There is no penalty. It would just revert back to people can submit 8-30G applications, which they've been doing for years.
And then the P and Z has to approve it unless there's unless they can approve there's a health and safety issue.
But
That's
that's no
correct.
different than
Right.
it is today, right? Or even under a moratorium?
No,
I
moratorium
guess you don't have to.
doesn't, it puts the burden back on the applicant. So that's why you are unlikely to see, because the applicant would then have to prove that their project complies with the regulations. And 830G projects almost always don't comply
How did they overturn Pemberton?
because the judge did not accept the commission's reasons for denial.
So
And therein
who's
lies
the-
part of the problem is the commission can decide anything if developers appeal. I think the percentage is about 2/3 of the cases are overturned.
Where are we on the expiration of the current moratorium? When does it technically expire and people can start submitting applications?
This October.
Oh, so it's October. Is the intention to file for a third moratorium
We do not have nearly enough points.
to do that? Okay. So if the moratorium expires, how hard is it to actually get affordable projects to work in this town, right? Because the
Well-
reality is somebody has to come in and buy the property to do that, or this is a pretty well-developed town, so actually find places to buy land, to demolish the existing property, and by the way, you gotta pay for that property, to then put in affordable housing, that by the time you add all this up, actually works, strikes me as a fairly tall order.
It is
So
a
what-
tall order, and I do have to admit, not every builder, developer is interested in, it takes a special type of builder or developer who is interested in monitoring the affordable units, willing to income verify your tenants, willing to document everything for the state of Connecticut, et cetera. And the payoff is in 40 years. Oh, in 40 years from now, I can revert these to market rate. Well, if you think of how old builders are, let's say a builder's 40, do they really want to wait around until they're 80 to get the full? So again, there's a lot of paperwork and penciling. You got to make sure that it works for you. Certainly, they're more controversial with the public. So if you're a builder developer, you go the easy route and build one single family house. You get in, you get out, you do your project, you're on to the next project. There might not be as much profit, but there's also less risk.
Yeah.
So, and less paperwork and less documentation.
What's the history of financial viability of these projects in Darien and elsewhere in the state?
Well, it's a good question, Frank. I know that certainly in Darien, the best I can tell, Avalon, who's a large real estate investment trust that has many projects throughout the state of Connecticut, has proven that for them is a viable complex, a viable way of doing things. Garden Homes, the project that's across from Rory's, the developer has done a number of projects in Fairfield County. The way he's done his projects, he's proven, at least to me, that he's got a viable way of building his projects. Others I'm not as familiar with. Certainly 2 projects we have, affordable projects in Darien, were both done by the Darien Housing Authority. That's a whole different financial model because they're able to get state grants, federal grants, tax credits, and all kinds of other more complex financing. Certainly, it becomes tougher for all these projects, Frank, in the out years. Like with any of our houses or any building you live in, the first 10 years are easy. Then things start breaking. Roofs go, windows, everything starts falling apart, or the carpets look worn, the kitchen's out of date. So you're constantly putting money in, and keep in mind, you can only rent those affordable units for so much. So again, there's that whole dynamic there. But you're right, Frank, it's, not everyone is cut out to do these things because there is financial risk, and it's a different financial model, let's say.
Is there anyone that checks to make sure they maintain the affordable units the same way they maintain the others?
Well, it's interesting, at the start, we do check that they're all, the word in the statute is comparable. And certainly we look at building permits that come through. I know when Avalon, their project's about 20 years old, they just came in and did building work on every unit. So they redid 189 kitchens. So certainly it's something that has to be monitored. But I think the question now is, the Darien Housing Authority does not own any more land in Darien that I'm familiar with. So they've recently done both their projects. Allen O'Neill was pretty much doubled in size from 53 units to 106. Old Town Hall Homes has gone from 30 units to 55 units. And certainly if people have other ideas for good locations for affordable housing, give me a call offline and we can talk about potential. But it's certainly one thing, you might have a great spot in mind, but you also need someone to build the project. And that becomes another twist because land is very expensive. And so right off the bat,
So it sounds
talking
like,
big numbers.
it sounds like the moratorium's gonna expire in October. We will revert back to what we were before.
Correct?
To the extent there are applicants for affordable housing permits, they're going to come forth and submit those applications, and they will be approved consistent with whatever the state's
Whatever happens
required
happens,
at
right.
that point, and it is what it is. So it sounds like we just need to let it ride at this point and see what happens.
Exactly, and like with any application, if the commission feels it needs guidance from town council, just what we do for everything is we call town council and say, we need help with whatever it is. And they help the commission, they guide the commission, they assist the commission, and if it ends up in court, council comes in, if the case is appealed, and we talk about our legal strategy going forward, which we have for a number of these, where a case is appealed, and we do that for every case, regular or 830G, town council gives the commission guidance on the pending matter, whatever it might be.
Got it. Okay.
So it's a very
So
complex.
I think we've heard that our legal expenses may be going up this year because of the expiration of the moratorium. Is that correct?
It's funny.
So my question is, what kind of legal matters would you envision us having to address post-moratorium that we wouldn't have to address
Well,
within the
certainly,
moratorium?
we've seen, and I've seen, I know Paul's been here a long time. I've been here 25 years doing this over and over and over. And I hate to say legal expenses, I don't want to say are somewhat random. The commission, most of their cases, 90-some% of the cases are reactive. Someone has come to them with an application, forget housing, on anything. Let's say someone wanted to put in a slaughterhouse. The commission acts on it, goes to court, and we have to defend the commission's decision. Sometimes council talks to the decision, says, let's talk about legal strategy. Are we strong? Are we weak? Do we settle? What do we do? And that's been that way for as long as I've been here and even before that. The number of cases and the type of applications that come to the commission, frankly, are somewhat, I don't want to say random. Certainly there's strong economies, weak economies, but the type of applications that people bring, this past year, and I think Jennifer would say, was one of the least council used years I've seen in my time here. Part of it was just randomness. A lot less controversial cases came before the commission, for whatever reason. Maybe it was COVID, maybe it was the economy, who knows? So it is likely, it's possible, that we get a number of 830G applications. Possible we get 1, 2, none, but certainly, in my experience, those are the most controversial. Usually we get a packed house. Usually, and I think I said that over the years we've had 9 830G cases? 8 of them were eventually decided, and somehow, some way, 6 of them ended up in court.
Okay.
So 6 out of 8 is 75% chance, based on Darienne's history, that either the neighbors or the applicant is going to appeal.
I know that there's a lot of chatter in Hartford about changing zoning regulations at the local level and potentially eliminating single-family zoning or taking the word character out, whatever, but if someone applies under 830G, they don't have to worry about this stuff anyway, right? So why?
That's a whole different topic, because what that pending information in the legislature is more directed towards what folks in Hartford are calling middle housing. So it's not so just as Darien has been pounding away at affordable housing for years and we're finally making great progress, the town says, that's very nice, but now you have this new thing called middle housing and you don't have any of that. We're like, wait, we've been focused so much here trying to get the hundreds of apartment units built, deed restricted. We've worked with the housing authority on 2 major projects, and they're saying, it doesn't matter, we want middle housing. And you say, what's middle housing? It's everything between deed restricted affordable and expensive market rate. So if you think of where someone who's earning, let me back up. Let me rephrase, because they haven't really defined it, Paul. It's, and I know this is on TV and it's tough because the legislation is still in its infancy stages, but the chatter is, we want to see more housing of all types, but more, not $1 million houses, but more smaller houses, which might help people, or more accessory dwelling units was another example given. Now, what folks in Hartford, at least in my opinion, might not understand is 2,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit could probably go for $3,000 a month, depending on how it was designed and where it was. They don't understand that Darien, the values in Darien, are very different than the values in, and if you look at the statute, they were trying to write one statute to cover the entire state. So look at Brooklyn, Scotland, pick a random community in the state. Is it really like Darien or Westport? Or is it more like Brookfield or Newtown or Rocky Hill? I don't know. So they're trying to do a one-size-fits-all. This is what all the communities need. Here you go, figure out how to.
Who are they to say what the communities need when all 169 diverse communities within the state? I mean, and everybody trying to fit into my 8.5E, it doesn't work.
Paul, we've been in on a number of the conference calls, but currently the perspective coming out of Hartford and its leadership in Hartford, it's not,
There's lack of leadership.
Well, right, and so that's the problem. We are looking at all these things, all these ideas which are being tossed out with, again, my opinion, zero evidence that it's going to do anything for anyone, anywhere, but they just throwing out ideas.
People are living somewhere right now, so why the impetus to build? This smacks of the school regionalization debate we had about a year and a half ago. They didn't have their statistics right, and they floated these ideas, and they felt like a lead balloon.
What's interesting is some of the proposals are in, I'll call it, the name of equity and fairness, but when you look at the actual proposals, some of them have nothing to do with that. And so certainly we're,
What's the definition of equity and fairness in the free market economy?
I think, so Chairman's prerogative, I think we're getting a little far afield here. I guess that the only thing I would say to viewers is that, first, Jeremy, thank you for this extraordinarily helpful education, and hopefully everyone has had a chance to watch this, rewind it, play him back slowly, right, because he talks very quickly, but I can tell you this has been a great presentation. I would just say to viewers that there's a lot of legislation and
There is.
rules that are percolating in Hartford that make 830G pale by comparison. And these range from changing how properties are taxed and shifting the property tax burden away from improvements, which is where they are right now, and more towards land, where they are less now, right? So what would happen is the sources or the drivers of property tax for your property, less of it would be dependent on the value of the house, and a lot more of it would be dependent on the value of the land. So how does that change incentives? You think, well, wait a minute, look at all the taxes I'm paying for this huge lot that I have on which there are no improvements. Gee, I need to subdivide it. So it's an incentive over time to significantly densify housing. That's a big deal. I heard talk the other day about the idea of trying to increase housing density or affordable housing within transit centers. That makes a good that's a good suggestion, because then that maximizes the number of people who live near transit centers and can take advantage of mass transit to get to work. But to the extent that the state doesn't get its way on some of that, some have floated the idea of using eminent domain, which would confiscate property within transit centers, albeit for compensation, as the Constitution provides for, as a blunt instrument to force the development of housing density in those areas. So 830G has been around a long time, but there are commissions and groups that are have been convened to think about this more broadly, and these are very, very serious proposals. And so if you're not paying attention to this in Hartford, I would very much encourage everyone who's watching to do so, and to the extent that you have an interest or a point of view regarding those rules or that legislation, to call your elected representatives. So.
thank you, John, I couldn't have said it better. But basically, we're monitoring, what, as we do every year, with every legislative session, we as a town monitor what's going on, because whatever the results are, Jennifer has to live with changes, I have to live with changes, Kate, Jamie, we all have to live with what the law is.
Yep, and when the law's passed, we have to comply. So do what you can to influence the passage of that legislation. Okay, we probably ought to wrap this up. Any other final pertinent questions for Jeremy? Jeremy?
Thank you all.
Thank you very
Thanks to
much.
you. Very much, appreciate that. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a begin review of reserve and recurring appropriation accounts. So this initiative really has a number of sources. I know the Board of Selectmen and Jamie talk about it. We've talked about it as a board. The folks in F&B and the RTM have talked about it. The whole premise of this is to take a look at what are quite a few reserve and recurring appropriation accounts that we have on the books. There are the headline accounts, which are things like the fire apparatus reserve, I believe police vehicles. And, Jennifer has provided a list of those that are some of the bigger accounts, and I'll let her go through some of that. In any case, we have a lot of them. There's quite a few, and they're $5, $8, $10, $50, $70,000 accounts that were set up for a variety of legitimate purposes. But the question that we've raised is not whether these are illegitimate. It's really just the point that we don't have a policy that sort of governs those accounts, both why we would set them up, how they get reviewed and tested to make sure that having them continues to make sense, how they're monitored in terms of expenditures, and then how they're closed out at the end to the extent that the useful life of that project has expired. So this really is the effort on all of this. Why don't I let Jennifer just talk briefly about some of the information she's assembled, and then what we can do is just discuss next steps.
Sure. So we have 2 pages of accounts in very small print. The top section, maybe we have 3 pages. 2 pages of recurring and reserve accounts. The 3rd page is town hall specific projects. So when I started listing all of these, there's not one, use of these accounts. They weren't set up for one purpose. They're not all the same. So I tried to categorize them based on the nature of the purchases out of the accounts. So there's some where we do equipment replacement. There's some that are directed at maintenance of infrastructure, new infrastructure in terms of sidewalks. But they're all over the place. And as John said, they've kind of been added over the years. And I think what we need to do is take a look at them and say, these are similar in their nature, in their funding method, in the way funds are spent, and come up with an approach for funding them, minimizing any balances that build up, and then take another group and say, how do we want to use these types of accounts? I really do think that there's a difference between reserves, like the fire apparatus reserve, where we know we're gonna have $1 million purchase, and we're gonna put aside money over several years so that when that purchase occurs, we pay for it. I think that's very different than the recurring appropriations that we have for small capital in the fire departments, where they may get $15,000 in a year. If they don't spend it, these balances have built up over time. So I think we need a different approach for a reserve versus a recurring appropriation. And then a couple that jumped out, especially during the budget discussion, they're towards the top of the first page, the 2 town hall accounts, town hall renovation reserve and town hall capital maintenance reserve. Based on the names, one was set up for renovation projects, one was set up for maintenance items. But over time, they've kind of become blended. They don't have a clearly defined purpose. And in addition, on page 3 of these accounts, we have funded separate renovation and maintenance items in town hall. And so I think we need to come up with a policy on what kind of reserve do we want for town hall items and what warrants its own standalone project, whether it's the size of the project, the scope of the project, the cost of the project. Something to say, yes, this goes through the reserve, this goes through a standalone project that flows through the budget process and is evaluated against all other requests. So there's a lot to think about. I tried to kind of start setting the tone in my memo where one thing we know is a problem is the buildup of unspent balances. So I think we could come up with an approach. Which accounts do we want to apply a method of wiping out balances and sweeping it to the Board of Finance contingency account? And do we want to do it at a year-end thing and say balances from 2 years old and back get swept into contingency? Or do we want to do it during the budget when somebody's asking for 10,000 and we say, well, you have a balance of 5, so we'll give you 5 new. When do we want to do that? But I think we need a method of minimizing these balances from building up. And then, like I said, developing criteria for when do we reserve, when do we do a recurring appropriation, when is something a standalone project. And just making sure that each of these accounts is clearly defined, what is allowed to go through there, make sure it doesn't become some kind of a catch-all, and if something really is a significant project, it should be evaluated in the budget against all other projects. And then finally, can any accounts be closed or combined? There is one, the second one on page 1, the equipment replacement reserve with a balance of $37,000 that we have not touched since 2009. I recommend that we just close that to the Board of Finance reserve. And then in terms of combining, we could look at combining those 2 town hall reserve accounts rather than trying to distinguish between renovation and maintenance. But I think there's a lot of accounts, they can be grouped together and handled based on how they fit together, but we have too many, and I think they do need to be cleaned up a bit.
A couple of things. Once the account or this reserve is established and it gets funded as part of the budget process, are all these amounts appropriated and the departments who run those accounts could spend this money at any time without oversight? I mean, they're...
Well, I wouldn't
Not
say without
zero, but just-
oversight, because they do, the purchases have to run through my office, so if something doesn't fit what the account was established for, if it's a town hall renovation reserve and they want to put in sod at a ball field, it's gonna get flagged as, no, you can't spend town hall renovation money to put in sod at a ball field. But as soon as they are budgeted, they are appropriated until you close them out, because the reserve for capital non-recurring rolls from year to year. Unlike the annual budget, which closes out on June 30th. These unspent balances stay there and can be spent for the purpose of that account.
It strikes me that the right approach here is sort of a massive simplification. I mean, I'm okay with large reserve accounts where we kind of know what that's supposed to be, like fire apparatus, and I think there were 2 or 3 others that could fit that purpose. But the rest of the accounts, I mean, to put up a straw man, I mean, I might be inclined to eliminate all of them, just in the sense being that these are not such large amounts that funding these reserves matter in terms of taxpayers, given all the puts and takes. It's an administrative burden to manage all that. You've got to keep track of all this stuff. And frankly, we've taxed money from taxpayers. We just don't know when it's going to be spent. It just sits there. What I'd rather have is a contingency account that we can approve odd projects that come up. I like that philosophy. I want to do it in coordination with the RTM to where they're comfortable with the balances we have for that purpose. But it just seems that we should do away with this. So I'm kind of curious in terms of how we might research whether that's the right strategy. Do you know, or do we have a sense for how other towns of our size and makeup are handling this? I mean, for example, what do they do in New Canaan?
When I was in New Canaan, we did not reserve for anything.
Nothing? Even fire trucks or big things? No, nothing?
No.
Okay.
They bonded for paving, so that wasn't a recurring appropriation. It was always a 2-year bond authorization. So they didn't do any of these, build up over time. Other places, they utilize them quite a bit. So it really is all over the place, and I think we have to find what's the right fit for our residents, for how we want to handle our taxpayer dollars. I completely agree that most of these, setting aside, for example, $30,000 a year for network hardware, software, if it's $40,000 one year and $30,000 another year, that's, in the grand scheme of our budget, that's not really a fluctuation. So I think that something like that, we don't need to reserve for it. We should have IT giving us, here's what we plan to replace this year, and here's what we need for this year.
I say it's an interesting point for IT. I mean, what I'd almost rather see, and we've had this problem for quite a while, is instead of saying, okay, well, this is the budget for updating the software for this year, the one thing that's been conspicuously absent is an IT strategy that says, look, this is how, this is the entire strategy. This is sort of a 5-year plan or 3-year plan in terms of what we're going to do. And here are the various components, part of which is a software update or a change or some kind of reconfiguration. I would love to have that debate, right, as opposed to seeing a reserve for $30,000 in mystery software upgrades that doesn't reflect any sort of strategic discussion. I don't say that to be critical. It's just that all these reserves are sort of small and piecemeal, and I look at some of the titles of those accounts, and gosh, it would be great to actually take a step back and say, for town hall renovations, could we have a strategy discussion about that and fund it sort of holistically, as opposed to having different accounts and cross purposes and God knows what?
And I think that's one of the major downsides of these reserves is they take away the need to do that kind of detailed
Right.
planning. Because you say, if something comes up, I know I have money there because we've set it aside over time.
Yeah, see, I don't like that.
It seems to me that if we know we're going to spend the money, like on a fire truck, in 8 years, and we want to fund it on a layaway plan, you set up a reserve to do it, so you don't fund it all in 1 year. But if you don't know you're going to spend the money, but you just want to have a fund in case something comes up, then we have to eliminate that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of where you are, John, and we should have some contingency funding in case something does come up, and comfortable, or in coordination with the RTM, what's the right amount of money. But it seems to me that if we're just putting $40,000 into a reserve every year in case something comes up, that's not really the right way to.
And I wouldn't characterize it quite that way. I think that's a little bit looser than what it is. I think most of the time when the appropriation is requested, there is some thinking behind it. But I think where we're really running into a problem with these balances building up is, well, I expected that to cost $20,000, it only cost 10, and now I got $10,000 that's rolling along from year to year to year. And then the next year, I didn't spend 5, well, now we have 15,000 rolling along. And then I think people become a little bit more complacent in their planning because they go, well, if I'm a little off, I know that I do have that. But I think that's where if we have a more robust policy on the Board of Finance reserve and how we use that. If IT thought they were gonna spend 30, they got 30, but it comes to 35, we know that we can go to the Board of Finance reserve and explain why we need that other 5.
Yeah, so what have been the discussions to date? Go ahead, Frank.
I'd be pretty aggressive about closing out these accounts over a period of 2 or 3 years. I don't even like the layaway plan on the fire equipment, for example.
That's a bigger discussion that's gonna have, that will have taxpayer ramifications depending on how we do it. I'm not wild about stopping funding for that and just deciding to bond all this stuff in the future. We have a serious discussion about that. I hear your point though. I guess the question I have is, what's been the Board of Selectmen discussion about this to date, and where should this effort reside in terms of work and drafting and trying to get it approved? And is this something that we need broad approval for, or can we stipulate this, or how does this work as a policy matter?
I would say that my recommendation would be to start with you, come up with a recommendation on which accounts you think maybe we should discontinue. And it may have to be over time because we should see what departments have planned for the balances that are in there. Especially because, we just started the budget year and there are some plans. But I think the recommendations on which accounts to discontinue, policies regarding funding methods for the ones you choose to continue. I think that should come from you as a recommendation, and that should go to the Board of Selectmen so that they, as kind of the executive branch, can work with the departments and say, is there really any significant negative impact that we haven't been able to see and take into consideration? But I think it starts with you guys.
Okay, well, as I said, I think simplification is sort of the goal here, and the simplification eliminates the complexity of management. It sort of centralizes, not oversight. I think, to your point, the oversight is fine for the actual expenditures when they come up, but it centralizes it in such a way that we can take a more holistic view on the spending, right, which I don't think we're doing right now and that I'd like to see. So maybe what we ought to do is maybe create a pair of us, a little small subgroup, to go off and think about this, maybe coordinate with you and come up with some dot points as to what our straw man policy could be, and then some action steps to take after that, right? So if the policy says X, then that means the following for these reserve accounts, but not the following for these, other types of accounts. And just come up with a plan that we could start to react to and poke holes in. I think this is actually a great start in terms of just pulling together data. And it strikes me that within a couple of meetings we could get something that works. The one that I think will be a little more controversial or just difficult to sort through is what to do about the fire apparatus reserve. I think as part of that, one of the justifications for the Board of Selectmen cutting the $500,000 appropriation for that this time, for this current fiscal year budget, was a belief that we could kind of spread things out a little bit more than what we're spreading them out. So in other words, it doesn't mean that we're not going to purchase fire equipment. We're just not going to purchase it on this particular timeline and let this equipment last a little bit longer. So I think the fact that we cut that $500,000, it means that we need to take a close look at that fire reserve and come up with a point of view that says, in coordination with the professionals and everybody else who knows all this equipment, this is now what we think the answer is in terms of the replacement for all these vehicles. And then we need to back into, okay, here is the equipment reserve, here's the future funding that's necessary, and then take a step back and look at that and say, okay, do we want to continue funding this reserve? Do we move to some bonding strategy? What are we going to do? But I think we need a bit more in terms of a refresh of facts and perspectives on that particular reserve as part of this. The others are not all huge. Let's see what else is out there. Fire Equipment reserve is standing at $1 million, called $1.8 million right now. There's a couple others that are largest. There's paving and sidewalks, there is police vehicles, and there is, well, that's about it. The rest of them are not huge. And so maybe even police vehicles fits into the category of fire apparatus reserve, where we just sort of review that and say, what do we got here, and do we need to change the approach to the reserve itself in addition to the writing a policy?
On that one, right off the bat, I would say, on that one, I think the way we're funding it makes sense. The police department has a very good replacement schedule. I think over some time ago, they were asked to extend how
Yeah,
long they
that's
keep
been
a
since
vehicle.
my tenure, we've done that, went to from 3
Yeah,
to 4 years or something
and
like
they're
that.
very clear on how many vehicles they're purchasing, what type of vehicle. The balance builds up because we appropriate the full amount because they don't know what they're gonna get for a trade-in. And so if they do get a trade, and sometimes they don't because it gets redeployed to some other town department, so that's why we appropriate the full amount. But I think on that account, that's one where we should periodically be going back and saying, they've purchased everything they needed to purchase, all the invoices are paid, they got trades totaling $10,000, let's move $10,000 back to the reserve account, or to the Board of Finance contingency account.
On the fire apparatus, can we include in our review the number of vehicles we're funding, rather than just how we're funding a prescribed number of vehicles? Is that, that, I know that's not within our purview standalone, but is that a dialogue that we should be having with the Board of Selectmen?
Oh, absolutely. Our purview is how do we pay for this stuff in terms of
Right.
financing and reserves. I think we have a lot to say about whether we're going to reserve for this, right? This is about paying for something, not the decision to buy something. So I think what the Board of Selectmen needs to do, and we certainly could help with this, is to sharpen their point of view about the replacement rate for these vehicles, because they're the ones who are the buying authority, or at least that the idea is as to whether something needs to be purchased needs to originate with them. But then they need to come to us and say, well, here's the schedule of what we want to buy in terms of fire apparatus reserve, and it's updated in terms of what we think it needs to be. Then it's our job to determine how to finance it. So that's why I want to coordinate with the Board of Selectmen. But all of this stuff here that we see in these reserves, it's all financing decisions. Because, quote, how do we pay for decisions, right? The money's been appropriated in these reserves to go out and spend money on X, whatever the reserve is for. This is a decision about whether reserving for this stuff is the right approach, or should we be taxing for it, or we should be bonding for it, which are basically our 3 levers. So I think that's why I think Jennifer's right. The purview for drafting a policy and a point of view on reserves as a general matter is our purview. Whether we need to spend the money, that discussion should start with the Board of Selectmen. But let's work together with them on this. I'm sure we can get to a good answer. So, other comments, Jennifer? Anything else?
No.
Pretty straightforward. Taylor?
I was just wondering, this is all Board of Selectmen stuff. What about the special ed reserve on the Board of Ed side? Are we gonna talk about that in this discussion, or?
I hadn't thought of that one. Are you speaking about the $100,000 that's sitting there?
I think so.
That one's
I
been
don't know a
there.
lot about it, but.
That one's been there for years. We could certainly take a look at that one.
Yeah, I would say if it's a town reserve,
Yeah,
I want to capture all of them, like every last dollar that's in anything that even smacks of being a reserve. Let's put that in there and let's just take a look at it. I don't want something to be left out. Now, unless the Board of Education owns the reserve, that's their purview and something separate. But anything that's not specifically their decision purview, I want to take a look at it. Okay. I could use a couple of people to volunteer for this effort. Do I have any volunteers? Dan and Taylor, thank you very much. All right, so maybe I could task you guys for our next meeting to come back, maybe spend some time with Jennifer, get some history on the fire apparatus reserve, which is long and sordid, and maybe consult with Jennifer and maybe even Kate and others just to get a sense for that reserve and maybe some of the history behind it. But one of the things we'll need to do to come to a point of view is, I think, reasonably get a refresh of the vehicle replacement strategy, and that's gonna require some time by probably Kate and Jen and others. That's gotta go to the Board of Selectmen, it's gotta be coordinated with all the fire departments, that's not a trivial exercise, so. Okay? And we'll just put this in motion. The other thing I'd recommend is to drop a note to Jack Davis. They obviously took a look at some reserve accounts as part of the budget process this year, so getting them involved in this in some way so that they're informed and part of the process would be great. Okay. Shall we move on to transfers? We've got a couple.
Let's see, the first one, $4,629 for the Darien High School cafeteria expansion. We completed that project a while ago. We closed it out, moved unspent bond funds in November 2019 over to the Oxbridge project. And lo and behold, we received a invoice that was outstanding from October 2018. We received it in June. I confirmed it had not been paid. Jill McCammon reached out to their consultant who confirmed that the work had been done and it was work that should be paid for. So we did pay the invoice, and now this is moving money into the cafeteria expansion account that was within the reserve for capital non-recurring in order to cover that invoice.
And it seems straightforward. Somebody just forgot to follow up on an invoice. I'm okay with this. Any questions?
Quick question. Do we have a general policy on old invoices? So I asked that because what happens if this was $87,000 as opposed to $4,000? I mean, this is 18 months old? So like, what's our policy? And I understand there's a contractor that was kind of looking at this, but generally in contracts, they have a time frame. You got to bill within 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. If you don't bill outside of that time period, anyone can kind of go back and say, you didn't bill in that time frame.
They had billed.
They had billed.
They had billed.
Who lost, like, where was it?
I was CC'd on it. They had Jill's email incorrectly. So the way all the other ones worked was it went to Jill, she ran it through her board, and it would come to me for payment. This one, I didn't know her email was incorrect, and just because I was CC'd on it, those usually went, okay, that's great, they have an invoice. But as my part of the project, it wasn't to keep the running list of what's come through.
So this was just kind of a
the
one-shot?
contractor did bill for it.
Mhm.
It just fell through the cracks and did not get paid at the time.
But that's a really good point, just in terms of hygiene to put in these contracts to prevent that sort of.
Yeah, every place I've ever been, we've always done that, right?
Well,
Because you don't want sitting out
If it
there.
had been a really big number, we can't fund this through the mechanisms that were put in place to pay for the project, so, anyway.
I'm not sure what we typically have in our construction contracts, but.
Well, it might be interesting just to see.
Take a look.
I mean, not to create work, but Oxbridge would be an interesting candidate for that, just to see what the provisions are in the contract for suppliers to that effort. That may actually be kind of complicated, because I think the contracting with those individual suppliers is separate. So in other words, the terms under which they bill the town are governed by the purchase order or the service agreement that they've signed.
Right.
And they're not under the auspices of some master agreement that would stipulate the terms and conditions for that. So this may be something that's kind of complicated to get at, but again, not to create work, but if you're sitting around with literally nothing to do, this might actually be an interesting thing just to protect us from stuff like that. I'll admit this is the first time something like that has come up that I can recall.
Yeah, I don't
But
remember.
you never know.
I don't remember either, John, and with, like you said, with the school coming on, and, bills coming through, and that's gonna be a large ticket item, just have something, just in case it gets done in a year and a half, whatever, I forget the time frame, and somebody tries to,
And they say, oh, I forgot to bill you for that.
yeah, and
There you
it's,
go.
on a $60 million project, you're potentially looking at, a lot
I
more money.
suspect they'll remember to bill for most of it, but you never.
You never know, like, I've seen the weirdest thing where people are just, I forgot to bill you like 50, 60, and you're like, God bless you.
Having
Like, you
been
can do
in
it.
town government now for nearly 12
Yeah.
years, I have seen quite a few odd things myself.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, motion to approve. Okay. And then Taylor. All in favor? Frank, are you okay with this? Take that as a-
Right?
Sorry, I was mute, yes.
Okay, fine, okay. Rob? Mute? Okay, we'll put that down as mute. Should we put that in quotation marks? No, okay, I'm just, all right, I'm sorry. Rob moved it, Taylor second, and with 6-0, thank you. Okay. Next up is a transfer regarding Parks and Rec.
Right, this is for fiscal '20. They're requesting to move $35,000 internally from some other facility accounts, seasonal accounts, to their security services account. They have added patrols at the beaches to monitor patrons, maintain physical distance and safety, and this has come at a significant cost. They do expect that they will need additional funds in fiscal '21 as well, because they have been continuing the service. I don't know if it will go all summer, but so far they're continuing to use the additional patrol. So you'll probably see another transfer similar to this for fiscal '21.
So this 35,000 covers expenses through June 30?
Correct.
And do we know when the West Tech was engaged? How long of, how many days or weeks or months?
I
was
believe
this?
all of June.
All of June? So
Yes.
this is 1 month's expenses?
There may have been some at the end of May, but I'm certain it was all of June.
Okay. So
This is important, I think, something we need to have. Any other questions? That motion to approve? Okay, Rob, second. Paul? All in favor? Frank, are you okay with this?
Yes.
Okay, 6-0.
Yes. Mhm.
All right, next up, these are transfers for last fiscal year. Now we've got a couple for this fiscal year. First one is for building inspectors. Jennifer?
Correct. First one is to increase the hours of the assistant building inspector. He currently works 32 hours. He has additional availability beginning in October, and the building official is requesting to add 3 additional hours to his schedule to bring him up to a regular 35-hour work week like other full-time employees. And in exchange, he is recommending holding off on the hiring of one of his part-time inspectors. And the need for the additional hours will help the department with maintaining timely inspections, and that's where they can offset with the part-time, the building taking on the new part-timer.
I should have asked Jeremy this while he was here. Do you have any headlines on why the Palmer's project has stopped and why it's growing up in the weeds? And
I do not.
okay, I shall make inquiries on that. Okay, Francis.
Is there a benefits aspect to the change?
For one thing, with the assistant building inspector already being here, up to speed on projects, it's better to have him rather than getting a new part-timer up to speed on some of these existing projects. So if Mike can dedicate more time to it, it's definitely a benefit.
Or were you talking about health insurance benefits? Or,
Yes.
is that what we're
Yes,
talking about?
right.
Oh, he already receives health benefits.
Okay.
So he's already benefit eligible, he's already in the pension. It will increase his pensionable
Oh, okay.
benefit by 3 hours.
Okay, great.
I think this is okay. Any other questions? Okay, motion to approve. Okay, Dan, second. Paul? All in favor? Okay, Frank, you okay with this?
Yeah, me too.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, then we have one for the drill tower fence. This is for $45,088. It's important to note that this was actually in this budget, but the RTM cut this as part of some of the F&B recommendations. And so, but this is back as something that they seriously think they need. Could you enlighten us?
Yes, so the fire commission feels very strongly about this project, and the town administrator and the first selectman support the project. So Kate looked through some of our old capital accounts, and the 35 Leroy basement design, we had appropriated funds, but it just wasn't a viable project after she did some initial work on it. So she is requesting to transfer the funds that remain in the 35 Leroy project over to the drill tower fence so that they can do that.
So if we do this, is 35 Leroy basement design appropriated and we're done? Or does this actually need to go to the RTM for further approval?
This is strictly a transfer between, no. Okay, so technically, the Board of Finance has the authority to transfer funds that have already been appropriated. 35 Leroy was already appropriated. You are repurposing these funds. You are not appropriating new dollars, so it only requires Board of Finance approval.
But you hesitated.
My personal
You
view.
know, I'm watching and paying attention. You
My
hesitated.
personal view is, a strict interpretation would be that designating funds for a new purpose should go all the way through the process. We have not required that because the charter does give you authority to move already appropriated funds. But this is similar to when we move out of Board of Finance contingency for a new project. It is technically appropriated funds, but is for a new purpose.
Yeah, so the only reason I bring that up is that with all due respect to the RTM, they did cut this, right? So the case was made to the Board of Selectmen, the case was made to the Board of Finance, we were all good with it. It went to F&B and they decided they didn't want it and they managed to convince the rest of the RTM to cut this. And this was last month. I mean, this was not that long ago. And yet we've come back and we've seen now a proposal that says they really, really want this fence. So I want to tread lightly here. I don't want to overstep our bounds and create problems, but I think the presentation of this in terms of they're saying they really do need this fence. I don't think they would have made a big deal out of it. It's not this huge amount of money. And my inclination is to go ahead and approve it with this transfer request. I do think we have the authority to do that, so I don't think we're overstepping our bounds. And to go ahead and let this go forward, especially given that they've requested it and the Board of Selectmen took a careful look at this again and have put it back into the budget. So I'm okay with it.
I have a question. So is the 45,088.05, is that the balance that's in the
Yes.
Leroy basement
Yep.
fund? So it's not, so what's the number they need for the
request-
for the fence? It
The
can't
budget
be the
request
same
was
number.
46.
Okay, so their budget request is 46,
So they could probably get it done.
so they can find a way to get it done for 45.
But we're not going to transfer the 5 cents. We'll close that out.
Okay, we'll use that Board of Finance.
Has
part.
there been any touching base with the RTM people on this?
No, this is the first we're looking at it.
Well, I guess, John, they really want, so the fire department, with all due respect, they really wanted it 3 months ago. And now they still really want it, but they really wanted it 3 months ago, and when we went through our budget process, the
We approved
RTM
it.
said no.
Well, so-
And so I don't want to deprive them of this, and you know, but it seems to me that your words tread lightly, and I'm struggling where to come out on this, because the RTM did express their point of view on this.
So the RTM's actions were in the context of further reducing the mill rate. So what they did was they said, we want to cut these and actually get the mill rate lower than the mill rate that was approved by the Board of Finance. And so it was in that spirit that they made a number of those decisions. And this is part of capital expenditures and some reserve accounts that they took further steps to clean up and reduce. Again, in the spirit of trying to reduce the burden on the taxpayer, and I totally get that. We actually did some of that ourselves. In this case, though, what we're doing is restoring an expenditure that they cut and charging that against expenditures that have already been appropriated. So this, in fact, is a zero mill rate event. This 35 Leroy basement design is sitting there. I mean, you could make the argument, well, maybe this gets picked up in this reserve effort and we clean that amount out and return it to fund balance. So possibly you could argue that. But in this case, the approximate action we're taking would in fact not affect the mill rate. Maybe we're not to tax for this.
I would agree with that, John, but I think it's just a comedy matter. We ought to clear it off for a month and give them a chance to express a view. I'm perfectly happy with the expense.
Other comments? Okay. I can't disagree with that. My personal opinion is that the RTM went a little bit far afield on some of this stuff in their discussions. I mean, I sat through that presentation and I don't agree with a lot of what they did. I think what we presented to them was the right answer, and I said as much in that discussion. That said, I don't think this is something that's urgent that needs to be done, so I'm okay with approving this and whatever mechanism we need to go through in terms of that process to get it to the RTM for their consideration. I'm okay with doing that, and letting them opine on this again, and let them have a chance to revisit this. That said, I do think we have the authority to do this, so if they turn it down, I would invite the Board of Selectmen to come back to the Board of Finance and we consider it again. And I will listen to the reasons as to why. What I want to do is the reason that this was cut before was that it was viewed as something that, quote, could be cut to save the taxpayers money. Okay, so that reason no longer exists.
I wasn't looking for anything as,
Let me finish, Frank.
I wasn't looking for
Frank.
anything as.
Frank,
Yeah.
can I finish, please? So what I want to do is I want to listen to that debate, and if they come back and say that we gave this due consideration and are paying close attention as to why these professionals need this fence built, and they turn it down for what I think are reasonable reasons, I think that's great. But if it's not, and it's a circus, then I would invite the Board of Selectmen to come back, and we're going to improve it out of existing funds or the Board of Finance contingency. So I just want this to be a responsible process. Our town professionals have got a town to run, and we have assets to protect, and I want to make sure that all these decisions are consistent with managing a first-class town. I don't want any nonsense with any of this, and I want to make that clear. So, I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, all I was going to say was that I don't know that we need, I wasn't proposing something as formal as going to the RTM, just
Well,
simply giving them a chance to come to us if they wanted to kind of affirmatively come back instead of, or going to them. Either way, it's okay.
well, I think that's okay. What I don't want to create is another RTM process, right? So we have a process that says the Board of Finance approves something, and that the final appropriating authority is a discussion and vote by the RTM, and I think that's fine. I think if we start to set the precedent that says for something like this, there now needs to be a consultation with the RTM at some meeting, but not a formal vote on that, where an RTM member or a group or a committee could come to the Board of Finance and express their disapproval. So if they disapprove, then what happens next? Do we say, well, okay, let's just go ahead and approve it anyway since we have the authority, or do we say, stop, let's actually take it and do this for an appropriation? So I think the decision that needs to be made is, and we're spending way too much time on this, but I think is relevant for precedent-setting purposes. Do we just exercise the authority I think we have right now and just approve this? Or do we take this to the RTM because they explicitly cut it 30 days ago in the budget process? My inclination is to simply approve it now, but Dan and Frank, I'm hearing what you're saying, that in terms of maintaining comedy and given the discussions the RTM has had, that you'd like to have it go through an appropriation process, and you know, I'm willing to acquiesce on that point. But as I said before, there's no nonsense on this. What do you guys want to do?
Well, I would prefer
Well,
to,
I'd rather go back to the RT.
Okay.
I agree.
I don't think it's necessary, but I'll acquiesce on this point for procedural reasons.
How long do we think it is before they'll,
They have a special meeting they're planning to convene a special meeting in August for Board of Education COVID stuff, which I'll get to in my chairman's comments. I don't know if we can add this to their agenda.
Well, one thing we're hoping to have a special meeting with them in August for COVID reimbursement.
That's what I'm
And
looking at.
planning and zoning, or I think Ox Ridge may have something that's gonna require RTM approval in August, so we may be able to get this.
So would we be able to add this to their agenda?
We can certainly ask.
Can we modify this a little?
But they'd have to actually, they'd have to approve that.
It would have to go through rules
Yeah,
and.
okay.
Is
There's
there
no
a
process.
is there a middle place where we don't necessarily add it to the agenda, but we defer a decision on this for 30 days so that the RTM has a chance, as Frank was suggesting, the
Well-
RTM has a chance to share their thoughts with the Board of Selectmen and or us?
Well, they could do that, but they have to discuss that as a body, and they have to add it to their agenda. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to go to Seth, and we'd have to ask Seth to go through the RTM process, which I think is Rules Committee for setting the agenda, and ask them to include this on their agenda, okay? So what we would need to do in this meeting is vote to approve this and refer it to the RTM for their approval. Unfortunately, if we do that, we don't know if we're actually gonna be able to get this on the agenda for August. It would have to wait. And they don't actually have to put it on the agenda. They don't have to consider it at all.
Do we
So we
have
may
to-
not be able to, we may not be able to spend the money if they decide not to put it on the agenda.
Can we just defer it to our agenda for a month from now without referring it to the RTM?
I suppose we could table that and not actually take any
Just
decision.
table it,
And if you table it, what are you gonna do? What would you propose we do between now and?
take this up in a month at our next meeting.
Okay, and what would we be doing? What would be
Giving,
different? What would be?
give the public and the RTM an opportunity to react to this request.
Well, they won't be able to formally react
Not
to this.
formally, but we will get commentary and et cetera.
Wasn't there a safety issue recently with the fence?
I'd be very surprised if they reacted negatively here.
Well, if the nature of the comments on all this, at the time all this stuff was cut, was pretty passionate. I'm not sure I could
But I
say
recall
that's
them
true.
actually not knowing a lot about the project. I remember the Finance and Budget Committee struggling to remember why it was being requested to begin with. And there was a suggestion that they call someone's relative who might know something about it, but then they managed to vote it down. So I think like you said, I think it was more in the
Yeah, I mean,
spirit of tax relief than.
John, if you want to take a vote of the board, and Frank and I are the only two votes, again, I'm perfectly fine for whatever the board wants to do, rather than just what Frank and I want to do.
Yeah, no. Well, this is a cooperative board. I mean, I could call a vote and I think you guys would lose, but I don't.
It's okay.
But, no, I want to have that discussion because I think your points of view are valuable. This is not a trivial point, and I've been a proponent of trying to maintain good communication and comedy, in the words of our recent Senator McLaughlin, to maintain that. And this breakdown in the process for the budget last month was a disappointment to me, and I think actually trying to figure out a way to improve and build on that. I don't take your suggestion lightly at all. I just think the mechanics of getting this done are difficult because we've got to get the Rules Committee to approve to put this on the budget. They've got to be asked to do it. And those guys have actually got to take it up, and they might say no. And so coming out of that process, we could end up where the professionals have told us that this is what they need, right? The people who actually run the drill tower, they say they really need this fence. And we're going to the RTM that, to Taylor's point, was not really clear about the need for this fence, or certainly didn't understand the need for the fence with the same depth that the professionals do who proposed it originally. So we could actually get through this process and not have an approved amount for this fence. So we're gonna have to make an investment to try and reach out to the RTM on this comedy point and cooperativeness point, but it's not straightforward.
We can still approve it a month from now regardless of what the RTM does, but at least it gives the RTM a chance to discuss it. We could still approve it.
I'm
Is
totally
that
fine
correct?
with that. I don't know what to ask the RTM in that regard. So in the standard process, it's quite easy. We vote and we refer this to an appropriation by the RTM. That's an established process. If we don't do that, I'm not sure what we ask them to do, because unless they put it on an agenda, we actually can't get an RTM, an official point of view as to what they want to do with this. Now, I could ask them casually, Seth, what do you think about this? Jack, what do you think about this? And come back with a sort of a sense of people that I've talked to. We could go that route. So we could just chat with people. Are you guys generally okay with this? And then take it up a month from now based on what they've told us. If they're really mad about this, then what we could do is either say, well, too bad you're mad, we're going to approve it. Or we could say, no, we take that into account. We'll let it go to the RTM. But if they're mad about it, they're probably going to turn it down. So in which case, if they turn it down, then we just have to be comfortable with that. This has gone way too long, but I think it's important to talk about.
Is there a pressing safety issue?
Not that I've heard. Not that it needs to be done ASAP. There is access to the site that they want to prevent, but I haven't heard that there's a pressing safety issue.
All right. Why don't we do this? Why don't we table this? I'll take your counsel on this. In exchange for taking your counsel, I want you guys to go talk to the RTM, to whomever you need to talk to, and at the next meeting, if you don't mind, bring us back a sense of who you talk to. But it's a broader sense here, actually, and I do value this point and take it seriously. So when you go talk to them, it's entirely possible we could get another request like this, because a lot of what they cut were not just reserves, but I think there were a few of these other projects. If this gets approved, we could have other people coming back with this same request. And so what I'd like to do is get a sense from, and I'd start with Jack, and you can talk to Seth, but start with Jack and say, look, it's possible that, I mean, you guys cut stuff there, and this was all approved by a whole lot of people before it got to you, and there are people who are not happy about this, and they're starting to come back to this. What do you guys think about this? We have the power to simply approve all this, but that doesn't do anything for relationships. Is there a better way for us to approach revisiting this stuff with the RTM or F&B, or just getting a sense from you guys? What would you like to see? Let's work together on this, okay? But as I said before, if professionals are coming back and
I'm happy
asking for
to
this,
do that.
I don't want any nonsense, and make sure they know that we need serious reasons for why this stuff needs to be turned down when professionals are looking for this. So I would do it that way. But if you, maybe you and Frank, if you
I'll
guys
do
could.
that, I'll do
Fine.
that.
That's all
Yeah,
right?
we'll do that. Frank, you and I
Yeah,
can do that.
Yeah, I'm okay with
okay, good.
that. Do we need to motion to table and take this off? or-
Yes.
Okay, let's move to table this until the next
Move to
meeting.
table.
Okay, Dan, Frank, you seconding that? I'll take that as a yes. All in favor?
Yeah.
Okay, you're in favor, Frank? Okay, great.
Yes,
Great.
yes,
All right,
yes.
so we will table that, and I appreciate you guys looking at that. And please do that in the spirit of trying to build our relationships with those guys. I do want to try to turn the ship around for where things ended up in the budget process last year, so. Okay,
Could I make one comment on that?
go.
Is this whole discussion, I think, ties in perfectly with setting parameters on how and when you feel it's appropriate to use the Board of Finance contingency and the reserve for capital non-recurring. Because this is exactly the type of thing, rather than transfer from one project, normally they would come and request it from the contingency. And so
Yeah.
having that arrangement of when you do and when you send it on to the RTM
So
would
it's
be
a
very
great point. If
wise.
this had not been cut by the RTM, this discussion would have been over in 2 minutes. Right, we would have approved the fence, the board of selectmen says it's fine, the profession, right? But because it happened to have been cut by them, to Frank and Dan's good point, we ought to go back to them and just check process and make sure that there's been sufficient consultation on this. What I wouldn't want to do, unless the RTM starts to decide they don't like the Board of Finance having a contingency reserve, and in fact want every last thing to go through an appropriation vote, that's their purview. They've granted us this contingency reserve, so we don't have to go through that process for stuff that doesn't lend itself to a protracted appropriation process. So, but to your point, maybe we should revisit some of that. I don't know. What I'd rather do on something like that is, if we need to have the discussion with them, I'd rather have Jack and F&B and a few other people in a public discussion with the Board of Finance, as opposed to kind of the one-off discussions you guys are gonna have separately with them. So I want to keep that thought, but I want to make sure that's a public discussion if we need to go down that route, and maybe in the fall if we need to pick that up as part of the whole reserve process. In fact, you guys ought to put that on your list. It's not just the reserve itself, but built into the policy should be some prescription that guides how we spend money out of that reserve. So I think that's a good point. Okay, financial report.
What I have provided to you is where our books stand through June 30th, 2020. We do have, it looks like we have a sizable surplus when we look at revenues of $147 million and expenditures of $142 million. But there are some significant items that haven't been booked through yet. We have not reconciled with the Board of Education. They do expect to turn back roughly $520,000. That was Rich Rudel's most recent estimate. So we can expect a little over $500,000 from them, and we have not yet booked the transfer from the general fund to the reserve for capital non-recurring, because we were waiting for the final June interest numbers to know exactly how much we need to move over, and that's more than $3 million that's going to move over. But overall, if you look at page 6 of the financial report, the unassigned fund balance at the bottom. I am actually projecting that we're going to be pretty flat for the year, which is going to offset. We expected to draw about $2.2 million for that early bond redemption that we did. We will not be drawing anywhere near that amount. So we expect right now I'm projecting that fund balance on June 30th, 2020 will be only slightly more than it was on 7/1/2019.
Right, and for whatever our threshold is, 12% or 12% of budgeted revenues, what's the?
Right, we'll be at 17.09% of the fiscal 21 adoption.
So more than $8 million in extra fund balance if we needed it.
Yes.
We're going to look at all that as part of this reserve effort. I still think the 12% floor makes sense for the board, for the fund balance, but we bled off fund balance in the past because it really represents taxpayer expenditures for money we're not spending in the current year, and there's been rationale for that. I think for COVID, which I'll get to in a minute, for the Board of Education, leaving that money exactly where it is probably the right thing for right now. So we ought to just stay put with it, but it's good to know that we have the money there. So just as a headline, what do you think the surplus from last fiscal year is going to be? For
Seriously, like $50,000. It's going to be very close to flat result of operations.
Got it, okay.
And that was with a few projections. We'll probably, assuming everything that was still encumbered on purchase orders is fully spent, that usually doesn't happen a lot. At the end gets, a little bit, scraps get liquefied, so maybe $100,000 to a good increase in fund balance. But it's gonna be very minimal.
The only question I had was just on state revenues on page 5, and this was just around the special ed excess cost reimbursement. So it's $284,000 short. I just want to make sure that that was because of a difference in forecasted special education expenditures that resulted in a lower amount, or did they actually get a reduction in the reimbursement rate that drove that, do you know?
I don't know, but I can certainly ask Rich.
Yeah, not urgent, but when we do the kind of final wrap-up for the year, it would be great to have a Board of Education summary that talks about sort of their original surplus, any expenditures that they had before the end of the fiscal year that was for buying stuff, if you will. I mean, they were pretty explicit they were going to do that. I'd like to just sort of sync up the discussion that we had when we put the cut on the Board of Education. We knew they had this surplus. I want to take all of that discussion also for the Board of Selectmen, and let's draw a bridge between that and sort of where we've ended up, just puts and takes. I could work with you on that, but I'd love to kind of come in with a clear statement that said, especially because the public watched that pretty closely and there's a lot of press coverage, let's make sure we have a clear bridge from all that to where we've ended up for the fiscal year.
We don't normally get that kind of report from the Board of Ed. Is that something that you want to request of them and maybe have them on the August or September agenda?
I'd like a formal request of that. I've got actually a meeting with Dr. Adley tomorrow, so I'll request that of him when I see him, but I think that's a good thing. Just because there was so much discussion about all that and puts and takes, not just with our process, but with the RTM, I'd like to have that bridge and kind of construct that so everybody has a clear understanding of not only where we ended up last year, what got spent out of surplus funds, where are we on fund balance, how are we armored up and ready for what may on COVID preparation and all that. So,
Yeah, along the lines of what John was talking about, I think in there, I'd like to see reimbursement rates last 5 or 6 years, because the 284 shortfall, to John's point, it's either low reimbursement rate or it's something with the cost. And the flip side is back to this true-up sheet, if you want to call it. When we were having budget discussions, they were talking about 881, I think the number was, of a surplus. Now it's, you say 551 or 531?
520 to 560.
well, they spent some of that, and they told us they were going to do that. It would be just good to know, have an accounting of what
Yeah,
that was.
and that's, those are two things I'd like.
The other reason to do this request is that there's an alchemy to these special education reimbursement forecasts that are not just kind of what you're spending, but sort of where things fall on the threshold in terms of amounts in excess of 4.5 times the average student cost, as well as your assumptions around reimbursement rates. And so giving us a sense for what they budgeted, kind of where they ended up, so we can see which parts moved, just helps us stay more educated in terms of asking questions next year when they come in with the next forecast, right? Because, well, there's components to that, right? Amount of the threshold, how many students, what's the dollar number, what's the percentage. I don't want to get into an overly public discussion of that, but it's such a large amount of money, we should be clear and well educated about how that's budgeted and why they've made decisions that, say, depart from what they did in the prior year. So. Other questions for Jennifer on the financial report?
It's early, but by the August meeting, we'll know where we are with property taxes, right?
Yes, so for fiscal '21, we're in the midst of the July collection period. I don't have the exact number, I meant to bring it with me, but the approved deferrals totaled about $600,000, a little more than $600,000. And some of those people who did receive deferrals have indicated to the tax collector that they will most likely pay before the deferral period is up, but they kind of requested it just in case they can't. So I think the deferrals ended up being much less than we thought they could be. I think we do still need to keep our eye on the collections, because there may be some who didn't qualify for a deferral, didn't meet the criteria, but still are either gonna be unable or slow to pay. So we will, forget when we meet in August, but we should have July, tax collector should have July closed out by then.
So 600 would put us at about 0.5%, is that about right? Of about
Yeah, I think so.
129, which vaguely sounds, what were we estimating? 1? Does that sound right? I know it's 4 months ago or 3
And
months
we
ago.
also thought it was gonna be mostly commercial properties,
Yeah.
residential,
Right.
so I mean, that feels right.
It feels-
I can't quite remember what we
Feels a
thought it
little
would
low
be.
from what, I think we had just thrown maybe a 0.8 or on the board, maybe? I forget,
Well, I think on the
That's good to
collection
know.
rate, we brought it down, I forget
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
was, but it was like the equivalent of a $700,000
right,
expected decrease in
Okay.
collections.
thank you.
Okay. Approval of the minutes, so we have one set of minutes from last month.
Oh,
which-
sorry, can I ask John one other thing, just on the COVID expenditures?
Yeah.
So basically, John, at this point, we feel the 319 we're gonna spend, both town, Board of Education, is almost fully reimbursed. It's gonna be
Right.
fully reimbursed.
And we have
well-
had some things come in, the Board of Ed number wasn't quite through June 30th, but their expenditures certainly trailed off once school ended, they weren't spending quite as rapidly. And on the town side, we have had a few more, we finally got our June legal bill, we've had a couple other things come through, so that is a bit more now.
Mhm.
But if all of the timing works out and we can get it submitted to the state, this is, the CARES money is why we need the special RTM meeting. Our $40,000 allocation from the state should cover what we've spent so far.
And the CARES schools, number 2 here, the 134,611, has that number gone up? I thought that was 119 or 99 the first time we kind of looked at it from a,
The
State.
134 is what Rich provided to me a couple of weeks ago. He said that was their allocation.
okay.
But when I did speak with him, they hadn't even opened up the reimbursement process on that yet.
Okay.
So there were still some questions of what would or would not be eligible.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Okay, minutes again, Dan, thank you for reviewing those. These for June 16th actually look okay to me. Did anybody pick up any corrections to those minutes that we might have missed?
On page 5, under special assignments, committee reports, third paragraph, last sentence. Only Region 9 and Westport have non-lapsing accounts in DIRG A.
Okay.
And about me being retired, I made the comment that I work as a business manager at Plymouth Board of Education, because then it makes reference to Plymouth, just to make that complete.
I'll also note in the following paragraph that Terry Wood's name is misspelled.
Oh,
Oh, yes.
Terrie.
great.
Paul, do you have a markup of what you would like that paragraph to read?
I'll mark it up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, motion to approve these minutes as amended. Rob, second. Dan, all in favor? Frank, you
Yep,
okay with the
me too.
minutes? Great, thanks, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Next up, special assignments or committee reports, anything for audit committee or shared services, Oxbridge?
Just on Oxbridge, the value management process resulted in a budget that, including contingencies, is expected to come at or below the appropriated amount.
Oh, great.
So it was a very well-managed, hats off to Kip, running that process, and to all of the people that on the committee and that we're working with. We're getting construction drawings now and shovels in the ground expected still this fall.
What's the reason for the RTM discussion for Oxbridge? Are they on the agenda for the RTM in August?
Been given the heads up, it's something to do with an easement. Does that sound familiar? State easement or something?
Is it a Department of Transportation easement?
It
Maybe on the
may be.
road?
I just, as we were talking about the need for the special meeting in August for the COVID, it was also mentioned that there was another issue, and I think it was related to some easement issue with the Oxford's property.
Okay, I'm not familiar.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot, Dan, I appreciate that. Francis, anything on shared services? I'm assuming Pear Tree Point, Pear Tree Point is all quiet for now?
No, well, that's pretty much shut down, yeah.
Got it, okay,
Yeah.
all right. Anything for, go ahead.
Quick thing on the audit, they did the planning memo.
Yep.
If we had a question or two, send it to you.
You could reply to that email. Elena Clausen is our main
Alright.
contact on the audit, so she'll be able to see your question and
Okay,
address it.
just a couple of questions on the planning memo.
All right, that's great. My only question on that, so the renewal of that arrangement with the shift in partner leadership and all that with accountants, that all worked out fine?
Yep, we have a new partner. We've had a couple of introductory meetings with her, and I think it's gonna work very well.
So-
We have the same primary team in place on site, but with a different partner.
Okay, that's great. All right, that's terrific. Okay. If no other special committee reports, just a couple of things for the chair's report.
Tell them to put it on mute. Up front.
Everything's okay.
Feedback.
Yeah. Hey, Francis, can you put your phone on mute? We're getting some feedback. Thank you. So a couple of things. One is, I do want to include maybe in the review of these reserve accounts, a look at our grant policy for the town. So I've talked to Jamie a number of times about that, and it's a good time to just pick that up as well, simply because we're looking at trying to create a policy for these various reserve accounts. And so for grants, just so everybody knows, the big grant in town is the library grant, which is about 10% of the Board of Selectmen budget. There's a bunch of other grants that we have. So for the fire departments, the Historical Society, there's a lot of that goes on. But like these reserve accounts, we just don't have a policy that governs all that. And so there's a number of issues to cover with that. And I think particularly getting Kate and Jen, maybe as the folks who draft the first round for that policy is a good idea. This is a lot more of a Board of Selectmen issue because it pertains to governing the expenditure of money as opposed to how we pay for those expenditures. So I think the town staff and the Board of Selectmen probably need to take more of a lead role on all that. But I'm happy to volunteer our board to do more of that. Jamie's had a felt need to do this for a while, and I agree completely. So maybe we can add that to the agenda. You could possibly discuss that with Kate and see what we can do to move that, nudge that forward, if you will. The other thing to mention is that Tara Achman, chairman of the Board of Education, reached out to me and flashed that they're going to start to need some COVID-related funding. Apparently the school's come up with a number in the $650,000 range, but that number could go up to $1 million or more, depending on some of the efforts that they have underway to protect both students and parents. So as we committed in prior meetings around the budget process, to the extent they needed to have us convene to entertain discussions about all that, I'm stand by that commitment. So we definitely will work to convene some one or more special meetings to consider whatever requests that they have. As I mentioned, I'm speaking with Dr. Adley tomorrow, so I'll get some more details. But as more information comes forward and we have a sense for what they need and when they need it, why we can bring this group together and try to discuss it. Now, the big thing to realize is that if they're gonna spend money, the RTM will have to appropriate that. So we ought to just make sure they know what the RTM schedule is for August, and there's, I guess, a meeting in September.
Right,
Any
September's a
comments on
regular
it?
meeting, there's never a scheduled meeting in August.
Right, so they've got this special meeting in August and then the regular meeting in September. Have you heard anything, or do you have any comments on any of this, Jennifer?
I have not heard anything
Okay,
about
so-
the school's need.
That's the latest on that, but like I said, I will find out, and then, of course, let you guys know what I hear, and we'll just stay on top of that. Questions, Paul?
No, if you're finished, I have just some brief comments on something that came up this past week.
Okay, hold that for just, is it relevant to what I'm talking about?
No,
Okay,
I
hold-
thought you were finished.
No, hold that for a second. So in terms of chairman's reports, that's it. Like I said, I'll report back on that either by email, or we'll pick it up at the next meeting in August. So is this just a point of information? I'm sorry, Taylor?
Before we move on from Board of Ed, I just want to make sure, I know that when we were, evolving in the discussion about how we were going to handle COVID-related expenses, first there was discussion of the non-lapsing account, and, now we've come to this, we're like, we're here for you if you need us. Do we have a process in place? Is it something we should discuss, since it's kind of it's going to be an unusual year where we're going to have, expenses that come in to get the doors open in September or August, but then, let's say fall sports get canceled and that money's coming back, like, how are we gonna handle all of that? And is that something we should think about, kind of talking about a procedure, so everyone's on the same page?
I think that's a fair point. The starting point, I think, for all of that is the procedures we have in place, which is that if any town department or the Board of Education, Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education respectively will debate what that need is, since they are the originators for spending decisions. And if they need an appropriation for really anything, it doesn't have to be COVID related, but anything that is an expenditure that they didn't plan for in their budget and they don't have enough money to pay for it, their process is to consider it from the professional staff that recommends that expenditure. It's approved at the board level, and then from there it actually comes to this board, and then there's an appropriation process. So I think in that construct is how we would actually consider all those expenditures. To your point, though, this is unusual in the sense that we'll reasonably expect a number of those types of requests. The Board of Education appears to be going first. I fully expect the Board of Selectmen to have something similar as they try to invest wisely to protect both citizens and town employees as this pandemic moves along. So I don't know that there's anything special that we could do other than to entertain those requests and try to make the best decisions that we can. If there's something that you'd suggest or think that we should try to adopt, I'd be more than willing to do that.
No, I just want to make sure that it's kind of as efficient and seamless as possible, because I know there was concern about like the difficulty of the process, like that we were, by taking away the flexibility, we were going to make it bulky and difficult. I guess it's nothing more than just expecting that they're going to come back to us at our meetings, or call a special meeting if they need to. But
Yeah, we call a special meeting. I mean, part of the reason we didn't simply approve a lot of expenditures and put them in reserves and let those boards spend the money was to actually have a process where we could review them and review them publicly as someone who's detached from the individual boards but has sort of taxpayer responsibility. So I don't think we'll be overwhelmed by all this. I think the one efficiency point that we could do to the point you just made is to try to combine these requests. So let's see what Dr. Adley says tomorrow, but a request I'd have, for example, for the Board of Selectmen is, to the extent you guys think some of these expenditures are coming up, if you could come to a point of view as to what that is, so that maybe we could consider this in August to keep that going. That might not be a bad idea, and try to keep it efficient, so. Okay, great. Paul, yes.
Last Thursday in the Connecticut Mirror, there was an article written by the mayor of New Haven, and it's titled, "Let's Tax Connecticut Segregation." And then the subtitle is, "If Wealthy Communities Are Going to Continue Using Exclusionary Zoning to Prevent Black Families from Moving in, Let's At Least Charge Them for It." This follows on Jeremy's presentation tonight. I'll forward a copy to each one of you. Our first selectwoman, Ms. Stevenson, responded to this in detail in the Darien Times today, very eloquently. And just some numbers I pulled from the state in 2018, Darien paid $210 million of state taxes to Hartford. New Haven paid $98 million. And Darien paid more taxes than New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, or Hartford, or any two of those entities combined. New Haven's revenue was made up of 38% of state funds, or $215 million. We got less than $1 million back from the state, or less than 0.5% of our budget. And for Dan and his Ox Ridge project, we'll get 20% of eligible expenses. New Haven gets 80% of their eligible expenses. I just want to make the board aware of those facts.
Okay, thank you, Paul, I appreciate that. All right, I think we are at the end. Anyone else have any other comments or anything else we need to cover this evening? Fantastic. Motion to adjourn, please. Okay, Rob, second. Dan? All in favor? Frank, you okay with adjourning, or do you want to keep going for a few hours? We stand adjourned. We stand adjourned. Thank you, Frank, and thanks everyone. Take care.